This is part two of three-part series describing our cycling tour of Western Vermont. So here's a quick recap. We found out about this ride through a tour book on cycling excursions throughout the Americas. This one looked pretty good, so we packed up our bikes and drove 2 days to Vermont. Our trip was a 3-day bike ride through Western Vermont where we saw all sorts of really cool sights that we had never seen before. The rides were great, the cars were courteous, and we had an overall really good time. But for part two, this is going to cover our time between Shoreham, Vermont and Middlebury, Vermont. As we concluded part one, we rode into Shoreham, Vermont, which was a very small town. We pulled up to the inn, and compared to the bed and breakfast we stayed at in Brandon, this was quite different. It had more of a rustic Irish pub feel, and it was run by Andrew and Elizabeth Dunn. We walked into the front door, and on one side was a pub and a restaurant, the other side was a seating area. Our luggage was waiting for us as the inn-to-inn coordinator transported it from Brandon to Shoreham for us. All the rooms were upstairs. They all had different names. We were in the bird room. Not quite sure why they picked these names, but whatever, it was pretty comfortable. After we had gotten cleaned up from our ride, we had gone downstairs for dinner and had a basic burger, fries, and beer, which, kind of hit the spot after the day. Now, unlike the first spot where we all had dinner at a big dining room table, this time it was more of a restaurant, so the six of us kind of paired off and sat at our own tables. After dinner was over, we took our bikes into the garage where we were going to store them overnight, where we could recharge them. And again, they had no problem with us keeping our bikes in the garage and charging them up, and we really liked that. We took a quick tour of the town, saw some of the sights, saw some of the churches, and eventually found our way back to the inn where we kind of enjoyed the sunset on the patio and also looked around the property. And it's just a really kind of cozy, nice place. That evening, when we went back upstairs, our room was very comfortable. We slept well. And when we were ready for breakfast the next day, we went down, had breakfast in the restaurant again. Quick breakfast of granola, yogurt, and an omelet. They also prepared some breakfast sandwiches that we were able to use for lunch, so that was nice. One caveat about this, when I looked at their website a couple days ago in preparation of this video, I get the impression that they don't really serve dinners anymore at this place. They do have recommendations of other places in town that you can go to. I'm not quite sure how this affects their standing on the circuit, but my guess is they're still being used. They do appear to still serve breakfast. Okay, so this started day two. We're going from Shoreham, Vermont to Middlebury, Vermont. It's about a 34-mile route, and it'll take us by the lake. And today, we're filming this on my phone, so I know that I won't be leaving my phone behind like I did yesterday. So, all right, you ready to go?
That's right.
Okay. So today we were going to go on a 40-mile ride. This was going to take us towards Lake Champlain, up north along the lake, and then into New York, into Crown Point Park, where we would see some sights. When we were done with that, we'd go back into Vermont and continue our ride from there. As we were traveling west towards the lake, the views were pretty scenic. The roads were hilly. There was a lot of gravel on this particular stretch because of the fact that there was some construction going on. So there was a portion of the western route was gravel. A good portion of the northern route was gravel. But once you got past that, everything else was road. No problems. We eventually made our way across a bridge into eastern New York, where we visited Crown Point Park. And the thing to see at this place are these old barracks that were used by the English during the English-French colonial wars. These barracks were built in like the early 1730s. Most of it was gone, obviously, but the basic structures were still there. One structure was for the officers, and one structure was for the soldiers themselves. Now, when the Revolutionary War started, the Americans took over this area for a while, and then eventually moved south to Mount Independence, which is a place we saw the previous day. Walking through these barracks is kind of cool. I bet you when they built these things, they didn't think some dude in a crazy bike getup would be walking through here, huh? Pretty cool. I would not want to have had to live in this place back in the day, let me tell you. After we had had our fill of the park, we had lunch and then headed back into Vermont over that same bridge. Now, this is where the kind of nerve-wracking part of the route started, because there was a pretty heavy crosswind, and since we were on a highway, a main road coming out of New York into Vermont. Now, this was still a two-lane highway, but still the cars are going past us pretty quick. That we still got great courtesy, lots of wide passes, but still with a heavy crosswind, it makes cycling pretty harrowing for a while. It was also at this point where our group started to separate. Some of us further north into Vermont, and their rides were extended to maybe 4 or 5 days. Ours was just 3 days. So we continued on the route we were going. We eventually wound up in Weybridge, Vermont for a rest stop. Now, again, this is not an organized rest stop. This is just stuff we did on our own. It was at a dairy where they served some delicious chocolate milk. And if you've ever done any heavy workouts or long rides, you can really appreciate what a good chocolate milk tastes like. At this point, we had about 8 miles left to get to Middlebury, so we hit the road again and really didn't experience much trouble. It was a pretty quiet ride. On the outskirts of Middlebury, we got to cross over a wooden covered bridge, so that was pretty fun. We drove through the town and eventually came upon the next bed and breakfast on our route, which was called the Swift House. That pretty much wraps up our second day of cycling. We had a pretty good time, aside from the crosswinds. The inn appeared to be a pretty nice place. Again, quite different from the other two places we went to, but in part 3 of this series, I'll talk more about what this inn was like and what our last day of cycling was like before we wrapped things up back in Brandon. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in part 3, click subscribe, and there's a bell that you can click on that will notify you when the next video drops. All right, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.